Hello and welcome to Hardtalk India. 1 year after the Kargil war ended, what lessons has the Indian Army learnt and how does it see its future relationship with the political and civilian hierarchy? With me is the serving chief of the Indian Army in his first major television interview, General Ved Prakash Malik. General Malik, on the 26th of July, the country has celebrated Kargil Day. 1 year later, what lessons has the Army learnt from this experience?
Well, first, I think you should never take your adversary for granted. And second, if your defense policy or your deterrence strategy is losing its credibility, then you cannot afford to take any chances like keeping gaps in your defenses, however costly that may be.
Is there a sense in which our defense strategy was beginning to lose its credibility before Kargil happened?
I think that was the perception in Pakistani mind. There were a number of articles which they wrote. Those indicate that perhaps that was the feeling in their mind.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the comments that have been made about the Kargil war. As you're aware, during the time there was a certain criticism that the Indian Army wasn't able to effectively patrol and carry out reconnaissance along the line of control. Do you accept that, or was that a mistaken criticism?
No, I must accept that we were surprised. And there were shortcomings in our intelligence and surveillance. Nobody expected that Pakistan Army will cross the line of control. And for quite some time one kept thinking that these were not Pakistan Army personnel but militants. So the assessments initially, it took time for us to make correct assessments.
So we were surprised, and in the beginning we weren't correctly informed.
Well, we couldn't make proper assessment in the beginning. That's
now, as
true.
you know, General, Outlook magazine came up with a wide-ranging critique of Army headquarters, even alleging that you as Army Chief ignored warnings that had been sent by some of our brigadiers in Kargil. Was that true?
No, I'm afraid the Outlook article was full of lies. And I think it was irresponsible journalism. We issued an official press release soon after that, which they didn't publish. They published almost 1 year later when they were directed by the press council.
Is there a sense in which they were therefore picking on the Army deliberately?
As I said, it's irresponsible journalism when you don't check your facts and you write stories, particularly of this nature. They can be very harmful.
They made no effort to double check with you or anyone in your Army headquarters?
Not with me. And I'm not too sure about my staff. They have been claiming that they tried to do that with my staff, but nobody came to me. In fact, subsequently, I once did call the editor, but he didn't come.
He deliberately didn't come?
I can't get into all that.
General Malik, let's talk about, in a sense, the substantive issue that's been thrown up by the Kargil war, which is this question of the readiness of Indian intelligence. Would you accept that the real failure of Indian intelligence lay in an inability to analyze, to collate and process the intelligence available?
Yes, that's right, Karan. I think the weakness lay in not being able to collate, not being able to analyze and then assess at the national level. And thus the forewarning element was missing.
Now, India, of course, has a joint intelligence committee whose job is to analyze and collate. Why did it fail to function effectively?
Well, for some time, I think we've been neglecting that. And that's how it happened.
Is there a sense in which this institution has been politicized by individuals who should comprise it having direct access to ministers or prime ministers?
No, I won't like to go into that, but the fact is that there has been a weakness in collating, in analyzing, assessing, and then being able to forecast events.
And in the last 1 year, have effective steps been taken to remedy this?
Yes, they have been taken.
You're satisfied with them?
Yes, I'm satisfied.
Briefly, let me touch upon one of the criticisms made about military intelligence. It's been said in the papers that from as early as September, October 1998, military intelligence was aware of underground bunkers along the line of control or Pakistani equipment depots and dumps that had been created. Is this true?
No, that's not correct. Whatever information was available was about some dumping, yes, because there had been artillery duels for quite some time, and some movement, relief of troops, etc. That kind of information was, but no bunkers on our side, no question.
So in fact, this is an exaggerated account of the information that was available.
That's right. And
Now,
it's all after the events.
One other thing, the Indian Express published the following sentence. This was written by one of their columnists. There were mistakes, very costly ones, committed by military intelligence, and that is the blatant truth. What do you say to that?
Are you referring to Shenoy's article?
I am indeed.
Well, firstly, I do not understand where was the need to make it civilian versus military. That's not the right thing to do. But having said that, I think he has also mentioned the same thing that I said earlier about weakness in collation, analyzing, and assessment. The other thing, as far as the military intelligence is concerned, when we are talking of intelligence, military intelligence is also part of that whole body.
So to single it out is wrong.
It is not correct. And then one should also remember, after all, they have a certain role to play. So the weaknesses have been there everywhere.
Military intelligence, in other words, is part of the overall problem,
military intelligence inclusive.
Army Chief, you've talked very candidly about the lessons of the Kargil War. What would you say is the major gain for India from the war?
Well, as I said, from every war there are many lessons. And please remember, it's not so important how you start the war. What is more important is how you end the war. And I think at the end of it, Kargil War was a big victory for India.
And a reaffirmation of the strength and invincibility of the Indian Army.
That's right. Not only that of the Indian armed forces, but also of the nation.
Let's move to the other lesson, in a sense, that the Kargil War brought up, which is this question of equipment and the availability of equipment. At the time, we didn't have unmanned aerial vehicles, we didn't have weapon locating radar, we didn't have a whole range of communication interception equipment. Has that, in the last 1 year, been put right to your satisfaction?
Well, the efforts are being made to make up those deficiencies as well as the requirements that you have just now mentioned. But please remember that these are not the kind of things which can be bought off the shelf and then given to the troops.
So it takes time.
It takes time. And people are conscious of it, that these need to be procured and given to the troops.
Now,
effort is being made.
In a situation where equipment procurement takes time, are you happy with the sort of defense procurement procedures you have to go through? Or do they unnecessarily delay things, and do they cause problems of their own?
Look, we are following certain laid down procedures, okay. But I have said it earlier that there is a necessity to streamline those procedures. It takes very long in our country to convert money into capability, which means procuring that equipment and giving it to the troops. The time period needs to be reduced. Now, talking of procedures, I think there is considerable scope to streamline those procedures. And just recently, a committee under the Vice Chief of Army Staff has been appointed, which is going into this aspect.
So that the audience can understand, is it the case that after the Army has evaluated its requirements and drawn up its list of requirements, that this list then gets questioned by civilian bureaucrats, and as a result there are often lengthy delays?
Yes, to some extent. Now what happens is that when we project a requirement, now the files go to the Ministry of Defense, and then at different levels people keep on asking several questions, and the files come back. Now, I'm not saying that all of those questions are unnecessary, but some of them are genuine questions. But all this takes time. The file is moving up and down.
Is this general why last year some 900 crore of the army budget intended for procurement ended up not being spent?
Well, we were unable to spend all the money which was meant for procurement for the army.
This, of course, could have implications for national security, this situation where there are unnecessary or time-consuming delays. Have you raised this issue with the Defense Minister or the Prime Minister?
Yes. Now, as I said earlier, people are conscious of this, and the steps are being taken.
Do you think, for instance, a greater devolution of financial authority to the army to make up the purchases itself would help?
Yes, I believe so. That's one of the measures which is being considered.
Would it help, for instance, if the service chiefs, if the army chief in particular, were to be involved in those meetings of the Cabinet Committee for Security when procurement decisions are taken?
Yes, that would also help, because if there's any explaining to be done for procurement, well, the service chiefs are the best people to explain why it is required.
In a sense, this whole issue links up with the wider question of the nature of the relationship between Army headquarters and the service headquarters and the civilian bureaucracy in the Ministry of Defense. Is it the case that when you as Army Chief send a memo or a note to the Defense Minister, it has to be routed through the civilian bureaucracy, who often in fact comment on it?
Karan, no, not like that. I do send my letters direct to the Raksha Mantri, but the examination of issues, then the letter goes down the chain, and then that examination of the issue starts at much lower levels.
So frequently a joint secretary who's junior to you in service, who's less experienced, ends up commenting on what you're suggesting?
Sometimes.
And in that case, would he in fact sometimes even influence the minister adversely against your recommendation?
Well, I think everybody should have the right to write what they think. So he does. But the point here is that does he know as much as
you do?
As I do, or as my staff does.
And so if he ends up swaying the balance, perhaps a lesser mind or a less experienced person's opinion has been given weightage.
I don't think it happens that way, but it takes time to correct it.
There's been a traditional concern that people in politics, more often people in the bureaucracy, have a certain distrust of men in uniform, that they're sometimes suspicious of the intentions of soldiers. Have you found that to be the case?
I don't think you are generally right, but sometimes even I feel that.
You do sometimes feel that. Does this attitude worry you?
Sometimes it does.
Have you had a chance to speak about it to the Defense Minister or the Prime Minister?
Oh, I share all my thoughts with them. There's no problem on that score.
So they're aware of this attitudinal problem in the bureaucracy?
Look, I think all of us are today discussing how to streamline all these things. These problems have now come up. They're right in front. And I can say one thing, that there is a desire to correct all these things. But certain attitudinal problems, they take their time.
Now, of course, this is perhaps one reason why the Army, supported by the other services, is extremely keen to secure what's called the integration of military officers with the civilian bureaucracy in the Defense Ministry. George Fernandez in December 1998 publicly promised that this would happen within a month. It hasn't happened. Why not?
Well, I can't say anything about that, because these are decisions taken by him and the people in the ministry. But I have always said it, that there is a need for us to integrate the Ministry of Defense so that we can come up with better responses. We can utilize our budget optimally, and we can also promote jointmanship to a better level.
So from the Army standpoint, this is an important priority?
Yes, I think so. Even the Kargil Review Committee has also said
Did
something
George
similar.
Fernandez, as defense minister, ever give you any explanation why this hadn't happened, despite the fact he promised it?
I haven't spoken to him on this issue.
You never raised the matter?
No, I mean, in the beginning we did that, and but after this thing happened, and then Kargil war took place, then we had to wait for the Kargil Review Committee report.
But are you still hopeful that this integration will happen, or do you think it's been forgotten and shelved?
No, I'm very hopeful that it will happen.
What about the post of Chief of Defense
Because
Staff?
it is necessary.
It is necessary.
I believe so.
What about the post of Chief of Defense Staff? It exists in countries like Britain and America. Is there a need for it in India?
Yes, I think so. You need it to be able to give proper advice on strategic matters to the political leadership in the country. And you also need it to lay down correct priorities as far as the services are concerned.
But then again, if it's such an important post which is needed, why isn't it being granted? Why isn't it being created?
Look, such things don't happen all of a sudden. There is a debate going on now. There are these task forces, particularly one task force, which is considering this. There is also a difference of opinion. I mean, that difference of opinion cannot be just wished away. But as a professional, I feel that it is needed, and hopefully someday it will come.
Can I ask, General, when you say there's a difference of opinion, is there a certain opposition from the civilian bureaucracy?
Don't get me into a confrontation with my civilian colleagues, okay? And but yes, there is a difference of opinion, and sometimes even within the services also, these decisions, when they are taken initially, they do not satisfy everyone. In fact, these are hard decisions, and the history tells us that whether in USA, UK, France, anywhere, they have been hard decisions which had to be taken at a senior political level.
So they take time.
Sometimes even legislations had to be passed. So these are not decisions which can be done over a period of 15 days or 1 month or like that.
Now, there is one area where the Army or you as Army Chief deal much more directly with politicians, and that's this issue of promotions. Are you ever under political pressure to promote people when your personal judgment would be against it?
Karan, no, not me. Right from the time when I took over, this matter was resolved between me and the Raksha Mantri. That in fact, I made it very clear that this kind of interference is not good for the army or for the country. And I can say that since then, last 3 years, nearly 3 years, this has not cropped up again.
Is it true that there was a point, perhaps at the very start of your tenure, when you had to perhaps threaten resignation to ensure that wrong promotions didn't happen?
No, I protested when something when I felt that unnecessary influence was being used. But after that it was corrected. Immediately it was corrected.
Press reports this June, particularly in the Hindustan Times, suggested that to be able to secure the promotions you wanted from Major General to Lieutenant General, you had to agree to 5 names that weren't on your original
No,
list.
that's not correct.
So that's a wrong report.
Yes, absolutely.
Then explain this to me. When in the commercial world, decisions about who is promoted or who's not promoted are left entirely to the CEO or the chairman of the company, why is that principle not applied to the Army Chief as well? Why can't you decide which colonel becomes a brigadier, which brigadier becomes a Major General?
Look, one thing I can say that the Army, and similarly in the other 2 services also, we have a very fine, a very objective selection system. And I can say it perhaps is the best amongst the services, civil services inclusive, that we have in our country. Now, at the senior level, I do believe it is the prerogative of the political authority to oversee this.
But at the colonel to brigadier level?
No. That I think because the number involved are so big, it is better left to the chiefs.
Is that something that you're pushing for?
But this is one of my recommendations.
Tell me something, General Malik. Today, when it's widely accepted that the Minister of Finance needs to be a specialist or the Minister of Industry needs to be a specialist, don't you feel that this same principle should apply to the Ministry of Defense?
Well, definitely we need more staff in the Ministry of Defense who know more about defense, more about the services.
All the way to the top.
No comments.
Would you say that Indian politicians as a whole, regardless of which party they come from, don't really understand and appreciate how defense requirements have changed over the decades, and perhaps don't make enough of an effort to brief themselves on the subject?
Karan, there is lack of awareness about security matters, about defense matters in our country. That I think we have to accept. So there is a need for us to educate a lot of people, the public as well as particularly those who are lawmakers. And I think we have to make a lot of effort toward that.
Let's widen the discussion a little, General. Today we're a nuclear power, but am I right in my belief that we still don't have a formally articulated conventional defense policy?
Well, we don't have a formal written down defense policy.
Most people would find this very strange. What's your explanation for it?
Well, I'm not sure whether it is a deliberate decision, but I personally feel that it needs to be written down. We must have a formal written down defense policy, just as most countries have it in the world.
Is this a serious lapse?
Well, it's always good to let people know how you are going to defend your country.
In the absence of this, people like the Pakistanis can be tempted to do Kargil because they think the Indians won't be prepared.
That's right. Then people tend to take you for granted.
As Army Chief, how, for instance, do you evaluate the potential threat China is to India?
Well, you know, we have signed 2 agreements with them in 93 and again in 96. 96 agreement has been on the confidence building measures, and I must say that at the moment, all along the line of actual control, there has been no clash as a result of that, but we need to progress on the 96 agreement, and in order to do so, we need to have more discussion. We need to understand each other's perception of line of actual control, and the effort is being made.
These are both political discussions and also at the military level.
That's right, yes. The military advice has to be there when the political, when these discussions are going on.
You know, General Malik, 2 years ago, George Fernandez described China as India's potential threat #1. Do you agree with him?
No comments. I do not like to comment on what the minister says.
Today, of course, it's not just India's external borders that the army has to defend. You have a very large role combating internal insurgency. Are you happy with this internal security role that the army increasingly has to perform?
No, I'm not happy, because I do believe that over-involvement of the army over an extended period, particularly, is neither good for the army nor for the nation. And therefore, measures ought to be taken whereby we can reduce the involvement of the army.
Now, when you put these concerns to the Defense Minister and the Prime Minister, what do they say?
No, they are all agreed. They all agreed with that.
Sometimes, Army Chief, without realizing it, individuals or the press end up making comments that perhaps suggest a politicization of the army. Does that worry you?
Well, current army has been a political, is a political, and should remain a political. That is good for the army and good for the nation.
And this is something all generals and the entire army high command is completely determined to ensure.
Yes. And let me say this, it's not only for the army, I can say this for all 3 services.
They are determined to be apolitical all the time.
As I said, it is good for the services, it is good for the nation.
Now, in a few months' time, you lay down office as Army Chief. In the 3 years you have been in that office, have you been able to fulfill all the tasks you set yourself?
Yes, it's been a very satisfying tenure, and most of the objectives that I had before me, I think that I've been able to fulfill those. When I retire, I'll be a very satisfied man.
Colonel Malik, for such an open and candid interview, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.